that we describe in this anatomy course, there is an etheric matrix, and it is a matrix. We have to remember that the physical body is a comparatively new thing. There was a framework to man 1 billion years before the physical body materialized. There was a mental matrix to man 500 million years before the physical body materialized. There was an astral matrix to man's body 250,000 years before the physical body materialized. I'm sorry, 250 million years. Let's get, oh dear, of course we have to get billions sorted out because you colonials don't use the same terms as the mother country. Is that right? 1 billion to me is 1,000 million. Is that the same to you? Oh, well, that's not so bad. So a 250 million years ago, that's 250 million years, and had not yet materialized the physical body, but he had an astral vehicle. And only 100 million years ago, man did not possess a physical body, but he had an etheric matrix. An etheric matrix. We have to remember that for every atom that we talk about, hydrogen for instance, there is an overshadowing outline to the hydrogen in etheric substance. I am at this moment working on occult chemistry, taken a stage further from that laid down by Blavatsky and later by Besant and Leadbeater. I'm working at this very moment under the master Blavatsky to take this chemistry a stage further. And in the final books of the 7 Pillars of Ancient Wisdom, the nature of occult chemistry will be described a little further than we are aware of or were aware of 10 years ago. So overshadowing a hydrogen atom, there is an agglomeration of etheric material forming 2 triangles. And if you were to take the physical body, for every tissue, let us take, shall we say, a nerve cell. There's a nerve cell with its nucleus and its processes. Overshadowing or underlying or interpenetrating or acting as a matrix to it, there is an etheric counterpart. Without that etheric counterpart, the nerve could not form, could not be fashioned, could not be maintained. And so we have to remember this. You have many times heard me refer to the physical body of man and its etheric underlying structure. But we must go further than this. Some of you who have sweated out many of my seminars have wondered why I have persisted constantly in doing drawings ad nauseum on the etheric body interpenetrating the physical. The reason for it is, and why I'm stressing it again here is, the good healer does not stop healing when he is not in contact with the patient. The good healer carries on at home. He is able to reach the patient constantly by visualizing the structures of that patient's whole. And visualization sends currents of etheric energy to the patient's parts that you are visualizing. And if the patient's nerves, the nervous system, is in a shambles, they are emotionally depressed, you are able to send energy to sustain the etheric part of the patient. Energy follows thought, providing you can visualize him. And to the extent that you can visualize him, you can help him. And so ad nauseum, I repeat it again, you must have a visual impression of what parts you are trying to reach. You may kid yourselves that you are doing the curing or the healing. It's God that is doing it if you must use such an anthropomorphic term. Yes, I've got Blavatsky in my eyes and ears at the moment. An anthropomorphic God. We all live by it or have lived by it. God, let's use a better term, the universal life force. That's a better term. And if you can visualize the parts of the patient, that patient is always available to you, always. If you can have part of him with you as well, as we shall see as the evening goes on, some of his blood, some of his saliva, some of his hair, his semen, his sweat, whatever it is, then you are able to reach that person even more effectively. The problem with esoteric healing is not that esoteric healing does not occur. It's always occurring. It's the degree of efficiency by which the esoteric healer may transfer his energy to the target of his attention. And it is said by the masters again and again that they will always use a healing group in preference to trying to heal an individual per se on his own. They will always use the healing group if they can, because far too much energy is wasted in transmission to the individual on his own. It behoves you to maintain healing groups wherever possible. You will find great difficulties in trying to do this. Try. We're talking about the etheric matrix of organs. Last night we discussed in some detail the heart. Not as much detail as I would like, but in some detail we discussed the heart. The heart, ladies and gentlemen, is said to be a universe in microcosm. And indeed it is. But the ultimate atom is said to be a universe in microcosm. And so there is a pattern, a stamp, that you can always use visually to impose esoteric healing energies on an organ. Even if you can't visualize the organ of the patient as you send energy to it, there is one thing that you can use instead of the organ, and that is the classical shape of the cosmos, the anu, the man, and that is the ultimate atom, And these drawings have been given again and again. We are made of ultimate atoms. A hydrogen in our body is made up of an ultimate atom, again and again forming what we call two interlaced triangles. We are made of ultimate atoms. The organs of the body are made of ultimate atoms. Man himself is an ultimate atom in the sense that he has got the spiraling central energies of the anu which go down the spine, Ida, Sushumna, and Pingala. He has got the lines of radiating force that whirl around in his aura. He is an anu, a macrocosm, this being his spine here. The ultimate physical particle, man as an anu. What about the human heart? I refer you now to the drawings which I have asked to be handed out, and you will find about 4 or 5 from the end a picture of the heart dissected out. There it is, it's called myocardium. 2 little drawings showing the left side and the right side of the heart dissected out. And what do we see? An attempt by nature to, as it were, elaborate an organ with fibers along the basic pattern of the anu. You see it? You have a picture in front of you of a heart dissected into 2 parts, showing it at the top, I haven't read it myself, the left ventricle, and at the bottom the right ventricle. A major part of the heart. Let's orient ourselves, and this is what we're talking about. The right ventricle of the heart and the left ventricle of the heart. There they are. And they have a spiral arrangement of their fibers. In fact, what you're looking at is, in gross physical structure, an example in macrocosm of what is in microcosm. Turn back a page and you can see the structure at the top there showing the superficial musculature of the apex of the heart. The apex of the heart, by the way, is this part of the heart here, which strikes the wall of the chest every time it beats. Dub, 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 dub. If you put your finger at the 5th interspace, that is between the 5th and 6th ribs, just below the nipple, at least in a man, then you have the place where the apex of the heart strikes the chest wall. And that is a dissection showing the fibers of the heart. We have, in fact, in this anatomical drawing, a heart in macrocosm, the macrocosm of an anu. And just as the energies pour into the anu, the energies or the blood pours into the heart, and there is also, of course, the stimulating force that flows through the sinus node. Now, it must be apparent to you that you can assist your patient by visualizing any organ that is difficult in them, an organ that is diseased. You can visualize it as being a pulsating anu, and you will help that patient. It is much better if you can visualize the organ structure itself. If you can be as specific as possible, it helps. That's why visual anatomy is very important. I can draw almost any part of the human body, not because it's a curiosity with me, but it is something that is needed. You should learn at least to be able to reach structures in that way. Now we can go into the etheric body a little, and we can consider the nature of a chakra, a fourth center. A fourth center is a vortex of energy which is fed from two planes or more. We're discussing an etheric chakra which underlies physical organs. We know immediately that energy from the astral plane wells up in the very center of every chakra and pours its energy from that center outward, radiates the energy outward. The energy has changed. It's no longer astral energy, it is etheric energy. The anu have taken on an extra spirilla. You don't know what I'm talking about, but that's your fault. The anu take on an extra spirilla and they become etheric. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it should give you pause, because I am merely mentioning basic theosophy, basic principles. You must know the structure of the anu, of the ultimate atom. So, an etheric chakra is energized from the central point where energy comes up from a different dimension, the astral, and it is also energized from without. From the etheric plane, it is energized from without. And the two forces together combine to give us what we call a chakra. Now, from the chakra there flows fine lines of force, which are called nadis. And these nadis transfer chakra force to overlying organs. We may take, for instance, the duodenum. There's a loop in the duodenum. The nadis will energize the duodenal tissue to assist it in its work, to vitalize it. How will the nadis approach the duodenum? The nadis will tend to approach the duodenum along two paths. One, a blood vessel. That's why I did the blood system first last night. Blood vessel. And secondly, along a nerve pathway. There's a nerve. So the nadis tend to approach an organ by means of an artery, remembering that rushing through the artery are these huge numbers of red blood cells. And inside the red blood cells are oxygen, and attached to the oxygen are vitality globules. So the nadis, whilst being transmitted along with the artery, are not only transmitting the energies of the chakra, but they are at the same time being reinforced by prana, which is leaving the blood. Now, of course, there are different streams of energy that come from the chakras. The sort of energy which would fall under the heading of Pingala, remembering that there are three pathways on the spine, the energies which are linked to Pingala are extremely negative, and they tend to reinforce any structure which is related to the sympathetic nervous system. The energies which keep the sympathetic nervous system going, remember from last night, keeps man enmeshed with matter, keeps him an animal entity, rude health, the ability to keep man constantly by means of his five senses and his desires and his activities enmeshed in the material world. That is the sympathetic nervous system's task. And the energies that sustain the sympathetic nervous system for this pass along the arteries. Then we have the positive aspect of the spine, which we call Ida, and this opposes the sympathetic nervous system, and it is mainly focused in the parasympathetic nervous system, which we'll be discussing tomorrow night or sometime or the other, and it acts, this force, which is opposite to the sympathetic nervous system, tends to act around nerves, move around nerves rather than arteries. So we get, as it were, an outflow of prana along nadis, which wind themselves around the nerves, and this tends to be parasympathetic inclined. All right? We have begun to look into this subject of the etheric body, and I'm going to come back, of course, to it a little later. I'm going to try and give you variety as we go along so that you don't become too bored. And I want to discuss for the moment varicose veins. Varicose veins. We need to know what varicose veins are and what we can do about them. Varicose veins. There are two sets of veins in the legs. Two sets of veins in the legs. If that is a section of a thigh with the femur bone in the middle, we have superficial veins on the leg. There it is, there's its opening, superficial veins on the leg, and we have got deep veins in the leg. Deep veins in the leg. You understand that? If you have a look at your little atlas of sheets that I've given out, and you come back a little way, you can find the veins of the leg. The veins of the leg, the superficial veins of the leg. Note, superficial means on the surface, and you have there a huge vein that lies on the inner side, the medial part of the thigh, called the great saphenous vein. Got the wrong page, Ruby. The great saphenous vein, you've got the calf instead of the thigh. The great saphenous vein lies on the surface of the leg. But tucked in underneath it and deep, at a deep level, is a femoral vein. We won't talk about that now. Trace the saphenous vein down the leg, turn the page over, and notice how it goes right the way down towards the feet. Now, what is so unusual about this vein? You have to remember this, that let's draw a vein here. This vein has got to take blood up towards the heart, hasn't it? All veins do that. Take blood towards the heart. It's got to act against gravity. Got to act against gravity. There's no pump to pump it because the pressure is gone. The moment that the arteries turn into capillaries, the pressure of the blood is lost. So the venous blood has to come back unassisted with the pressure of the heart. The way in which it does this in the legs, where you have tremendous gravity to act against, is through a system of valves. A system of valves. And so I'm going to put in my drawing here some valves in a superficial vein in the leg. What happens is this. Any sort of movement of the leg, muscular movement, any sort of pressure like bending or running will mean that the muscles around the veins will squeeze the veins. The result is the blood will move. The blood can only move one way. The valves stop it moving down. The valves allow the blood only to move in one direction. And that's the way in which the venous blood gets back to the heart. Now look at this huge column of blood that stretches, in the case of the saphenous vein, from the top of the thigh right down to the feet. Took that as a glass tube, you would have quite a lot of weight there. A lot of fluid held in a vein. And remember that the veins' walls are very thin. They're not like arteries. The veins' walls are very thin. Now, in some individuals, the valves are not present. The valves are not present. And the result is, with standing, the valves, at least the vein bulges in pockets like that, because there are no valves to ensure the blood will move upwards constantly. The result is the blood falls back in the vein under gravity, and the veins bulge. Sometimes valves are present, but they're delicate. If the person has a standing job all day, a barber's job, a haircutter, or something requiring constant standing, the valves are weak, then they break down. The valves, the vein begins to bulge and produce what we call varicosities. Varicosities. And the varicosities indicate, of course, stagnant blood. Stagnant blood. And wherever blood is stagnant, it is susceptible, the whole region is susceptible to invasion by bacteria. So you may get inflammation of the veins, which we call phlebitis. Soreness, redness over the region of the veins, very incapacitating. Now, how do we go about curing this condition, overcoming this condition? There is a very popular and very excellent operation form in which the vein is stripped out completely. The vein lies on the surface of the leg. What happens is that a cut is made in the tissue above the vein, and this is the part that it is wider, thickest at the top rather than at the bottom, and a piece of metal or plastic is passed down the vein all the way down it, and at the bottom here another slit is made on the ankle, and this piece of wire or string with a hook on the end of it is tied to the vein. The vein is severed there and sewn up, tied, and then this long piece of cord is pulled, and the vein is stripped right out, taken right out altogether. Comes away zip, just like that. And it tends to be a very good operation. Not always successful, but it tends to be a good operation. You will say, what on earth happens to the blood that normally returns to the heart through that vein? The answer is that the blood now has got to go in the deep veins of the leg. It takes a little time for the adjustment to be made, but as the patient exercises herself, sooner or later these veins begin to increase in size, and they take all the traffic in venous blood. I've seen many successful operations in that respect. What can be done outside of surgery, which is always the province of the esotericist, to try and do something without resorting to surgery, without resorting to drugs, and so on? I can describe a method that can be used and tell you that it has been used very successfully by an esoteric, medically qualified friend of mine in England. And that is to bind the leg with bandages, and anybody who has had varicosities of any seriousness will know what that involves. To bind the leg, bandages, crepe bandages, not too tight, of course, but firmly, and then you prescribe for the patient good daily exercise, stiff walks. The result of the therapy is that the bandages won't allow these veins to work on the surface of the leg. Veins can't work. And the result is that because there is exercise and the blood is being forced into the legs, it's got to get back somehow, and it increases the size of the deep veins. This maneuver increases the lumen of the deep veins, and the blood gets back to the trunk, to the body, more and more through the deep veins instead of the superficial ones. Add to this the usual therapies that attend the care of varicose veins, and new pathways are opened, and the blood will use less and less the superficial veins. So that is something worth remembering with regard to varicosities. Now I want to go back again to the heart, And if we look at our drawings, our little anatomy atlas that I provided you with, you will find a picture on the page following the varicose legs, or rather the veins of the legs. You will see a picture of a thymus gland in a fetus. Pericardium is the surface material, the little bag that the heart lies in. So you're really looking at a picture of the heart underneath a pericardial sac, and above it a thymus gland. A large gland in a child I'll turn the page over and have a look at the thymus gland there, which has practically disappeared in the adult. Halfway down you'll see a sort of shrunken bilobe structure, right lobe of thymus gland, left lobe of thymus gland. You see it? Thymus gland has practically disappeared into nothing. Still functional, but not nearly as big relatively as the thymus was in the child. The thymus gland is the endocrine gland related to the heart chakra. Related to the heart chakra. So we will draw in the heart chakra, which tends to lie in the middle of the body. Tends to lie in the middle of the body. The heart is very slightly displaced towards the left. I'll pencil it in for you. Something like that. There's the heart and there's the heart chakra. Now, you haven't got that in your drawing. I'm doing it on the board for you. And very close to this region in the mediastinum is the thymus gland you have on your picture. So here are the structures: thymus gland, the heart chakra, 12-petaled lotus, and the heart itself. Three important structures. The heart gives out this huge aorta, remember from last night, gives branches to the head and to the arms, carotid arteries to the head, and branches, the subclavian branches, to the arms, and then goes down into the abdomen. There it is. Now, I think we have another drawing which will serve you some purpose, and that is, if I remember rightly, I may be wrong. Has anybody got a picture of an aorta going through the diaphragm? Yes, where's that? Our thing's not complete. Fourth from the front? The fourth drawing from the front, which I haven't got. Yes. All right, the great arteries and veins of the trunk. There's a beautiful picture. Try and identify some of the parts that I've been describing. See the aorta coming out of the heart, the great arch of life, as it is called. All the blood in the body passes through the aorta. It's about 1.5 inches or 1.25 inches in diameter. And it passes down behind the heart, trace it, perforates the diaphragm, that most important esoteric structure, and then goes down into the abdomen. And you can see it all lying there. So we know where we are now in this drawing. All I have to do is to put in a diaphragm, and you've got, you know where I am. There's your diaphragm, something like that. There's the diaphragm. Now, the heart chakra. In the last drawing that I gave you, you'll remember I said that, in fact, the sympathetic structures of the body were energized by etheric energy along arteries, and the whole of the aorta is covered with sympathetic plexuses of nerves, indicating that vast amounts of energy from the heart chakra finding its way to the various structures in the chest along the walls of the aortic arch. And more than anything, and this is terribly important, the etheric energies from the heart and from the throat chakra pass up along the carotid arteries. Round the walls of the carotid arteries pass up into the head region. Now, I've mentioned this chakra here to give you some sort of explanation for coronary conditions that exist so frequently today. The classical example of the man who gets a coronary is the tired businessman, man who is the factory owner, the man who has all the problems of the factory on his shoulders. He must finance the factory, he must care for his employees, their pension schemes, he must ensure purchases of raw material, he must see the trade unions run smoothly and meet the trade union leaders. All these problems are presented in mass to the factory owner or manager. In fact, what is happening here is that he is becoming the heart chakra of that huge organization. He becomes the heart chakra of his group of his factory, of his business, and the strain imposed upon his own heart is increased tremendously. And this is said to be one of the causes of the formation of plaques, arterioles which clog up the coronary arteries. The reason is twofold. His work as a focal point in a large organization involves his mixing with the non-self. He has to admit into his thinking the attitudes of the trade union leader, though he is a conservative, though he is a capitalist. He must admit the non-self to himself. He must consider the pension schemes of others in his factory. It's a constant concern for the not-self, and it imposes a tremendous strain on the individual. He is trying to embrace everything which is a heart chakra quality. When you embrace more than just your own interest, you are practicing heart chakra opening, and it stimulates the heart chakra. The moment that you become the center of a large organization, tremendous stimulation of your heart chakra occurs. So much so that the very moment not self enters the heart, bacteria, germs, toxins, plaques of calcium, there is an abnormal reaction on the heart's part. And the result is an increase in coronary disorders. Add also to this the fact that the businessman is a sort of person who has frequent business lunches. And the business lunches, by virtue of the fact that the period is a short period, is usually steak and something. And the steak provides animal fat, and the animal fats provide cholesterol, the oil in the blood that is death-dealing, needed by the body. At an excessive amount, it can cause coronary artery disease, a closing of the coronary arteries, and you've got a picture of extreme danger for such an individual. Now, I'm going to give you later on the finest treatment for all these conditions, the varicose veins, the ulcerations of the leg, the coronaries, and so on. I will give it to you later on, but I must try and deal with this subject. There is something else about the heart which I mentioned yesterday that is of importance. I said that through the sinus node of the right atrium, where the impulses of the anima mundi of the earth enter, cause waves of contraction to occur in the heart, through the sinus node, man is linked to the etheric body of the planet, And when he becomes more than a man, more than a solitary individual, that he is sustaining 300 employees and is sustaining also an immense organization involving material things, he automatically receives an excessive supply of etheric energy from the body of the planet, the anima mundi, the world soul, if you wish. And this sort of excessive etheric intrusion tends to lead towards the disorders of the heart, which are of electrical origin that I described yesterday. Fibrillation, the timing of the heart going haywire. And one of the most vicious circumstances for such an individual, and after all I'm talking about here is increase in responsibility. And remember that the criterion of spiritual unfoldment in an individual is his ability to shoulder increased responsibility for mankind. That is the first criterion of spiritual integrity, increasing spiritual integrity, the ability to become increasingly responsible for others. It means that you are not just an individual who is fed what's the board, is fed from the etheric energies of the planet, but you are more than one individual, and you are entitled to more energy. They all come through the same sinus node. So we understand that the opening of a heart chakra is not the property of an esotericist. All men and women are opening their heart chakras slowly and progressively. The man who is deeply concerned about his employees and their pensions and the trade unions in his factory is a person who is concerned and responsible, and he is opening the chakra in the heart region as much as any esotericist. The difference is that he does not know the esoteric disciplines and therefore becomes prone to attack, does not know that certain things are required, that if you open the heart chakra, you must cut down on the not self. You must be very careful of what you eat, what you inhale, and what you do in your life. Harmlessness to all living things, and so on. And that is where the problem of the esoteric problem of heart conditions arise. If you study my book, Esoteric Healing, you will see also that another situation arises in the terribly sensitive area, only here, ladies and gentlemen, only here, where this is the hegemony, the realm of the heart chakra. And it is this: even if you transplant a heart, as I've said before, they can transplant part of the heart very well, sew it in beautifully. After a while, despite the use of non-self drugs that prevent the body from rejecting the not-self, the coronary arteries, the arteries in this region here, from the aorta and so on, stir up, get plaques of calcium deposited in them, and finally death supervenes because these arteries are unable to adjust themselves to the new vehicle, or the new vehicle is unable to adjust itself to the tissue that's been sewn into it. Go back also to my book and see how arteriosclerosis is increased under the stimulus of the opening of an ajna center. An ajna center. We're now talking about the effect of the brow chakra on the heart chakra. And this is teaching that was given to me when I was doing medicine, studying medicine, by the English master, Robert Browning. He said this, that the walls of arteries, all arteries in the body, walls of arteries, this part here, which is known as the endothelial cells, or endothelium, the endothelial cells just in the walls of arteries are able to take up nitrogen from the blood and has all the capacities of other kingdoms. That's Blavatsky. One of the capacities of the plant kingdom is to take up atmospheric nitrogen. A little group of plant bacteria called azobacteria are able to synthesize to make nitrate salts out of atmospheric nitrogen. Now, ladies and gentlemen, 4/5 of all the air we breathe is nitrogen, and yet we can't use it, says science. Though we desperately require nitrogen, which is the essence of protein, no man can live without protein. Biologists will tell you we can't get nitrogen from the air we breathe, even though it's 4/5 nitrogen. We can only get nitrogen from proteins that we eat. Our answer to that is nonsense. Our answer is that certain cells in the body can take up atmospheric nitrogen, and these are the endothelial cells lining the arteries. Of course, they don't function like they should do because man has become generally a meat eater. When he eats a lot of meat, then there is no need for these cells to take up nitrogen. There's enough. But if he becomes vegetarian, if he is limited in the amount of protein, whether vegetarian or meat is of no concern, then in desperation these cells come into function. They will take up nitrogen, usually in not sufficient quantities to save the person from malnutrition if he is starving, but they will take up nitrogen. In the years ahead, perhaps somebody in this room studying biology will get a grant to prove the truth of these words, that under certain circumstances body cells will take up nitrogen. Now, out of this fact there comes hazard. Let us take a person under stress. We're all under stress, God knows it. A person is under stress. It is the ajna center and the pituitary gland that receives always the highest aspect of that stress. The ajna center is aroused by stress, especially mental stress, or mental stress. Here in the West we talk about mental stress. Physical stress is nothing. Heavens, we've learnt that. But mental stress will arouse ajna, stimulate the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland secretes the hormone that Browning says causes the endothelial cells to take up nitrogen. So there's your picture. There's the pituitary gland with its ajna center. When it is under stress, a hormone travels from the pituitary gland to the walls of the arteries, especially these, the region of the thorax and the heart chakra. The cells in the walls of arteries start to take up nitrogen. Now let's go back to our businessman. Typical of the businessman. He's under stress, especially mental stress. He's eating excessive amounts of meat. The stress is making the cells in the walls of the arteries take up nitrogen, and the stress makes them take up the nitrogen excessively, but at the same time the blood is loaded with nitrogen in the form of amino acids from the proteins he's been eating. Result is too much nitrogen uptake here leads to deposits of fat, cholesterol, calcium, and deterioration of the arterial walls, what we call arteriosclerosis. I've written that up in some detail in my book. I thought that it was relevant to mention it here. I'm going to have questions in a few minutes. I want now, by way of a diversion, to go into the most important of all subjects, inflammation. Inflammation. And most people don't know very much about inflammation except that it's damn sore. Get rid of it as quick as you can, not realizing that all disease is purificatory in nature, And an inflammation is an attempt on the part of the body to throw off a condition of disorder that is unacceptable, that will kill the body eventually, whether it is a toxin that's been introduced, whether it's a thorn in the foot, or whether it is pollen in the nose. The body will try and reject the not self. Inflammation is basically dependent on two factors, esoterically speaking. It is an arousal of the heart chakra acting through the thymus gland and similar tissues, which we call the lymphatics, and it is also an arousal of the chakra at the base of the spine. And its endocrine glands are the suprarenal glands, the glands that lie above the kidneys. Let me just fit that in for you and point it out. Thymus gland, which we've just looked at, related to the heart chakra, that's involved in inflammation, and also chakra at the base of the spine, as it is related to the two little endocrine glands known as the suprarenal. Suprarenal means above the kidney. There's the two kidneys. I put them in for you. There you are. There are the suprarenal glands. They are the endocrine glands related to the chakra at the base of the spine. The effect of these two being aroused together is to bring violent, look at the board, violent reaction against the not self. Violent, always the base of the spine. Violent. Power. Let's put an elephant at the base of the spine for no purpose at all. Power. Powerful rejection of not self. Two main chakras. No clear understanding of inflammation is possible without, first of all, knowing something about the lymphatics of the body, the lymphatics. And the lymphatics are very difficult anatomical structures to view. The usual medical student who does a dissection usually destroys the lymphatics before he's aware of the fact. They're so delicately constructed. They form a separate sort of circulation in the body, a separate sort of circulation. The blood system is fully enclosed, By that we mean that all the blood lies in vessels. Understand that? All the blood lies in vessels. But outside of the blood there is a whole sea of liquid, which we call intercellular liquid. Intercellular liquid. The liquid that lies between the cells. So I have to start going into drawings again, otherwise you will soon become confused. Cells of the body, doesn't matter whether we're talking about kidney or liver cells, are bathed in a fluid, a liquid, called, a body fluid called intercellular fluid. Inter meaning between, intercellular fluid. And these fluids bring substances from the blood to the cells. The blood vessels can't reach every single cell directly, and sometimes they have to pass nearby. And things like oxygen and inorganic materials flow by means of the fluid, the intercellular fluid, to the cells. That you can understand. Now, lying in this intercellular fluid is the substance of the lymphatics. And they are delicate little tubes, and they end in blind passages. They're blind, they're not open, which lie in amongst the tissue, like that drawing. There's a typical lymphatic. Tiny little processes, very delicate, hollow passages, not hollow, but filled with fluid, and they drain all towards the large veins in the trunk of the body. Notice how these lymphatics, if you trace them from the feet, notice how they move upwards towards the groin, and they're gathered together in little lymph nodes in the groin. Lymph nodes, tiny little black dots shown on the drawing there. Similarly, the lymphatics or lymph ducts or lymph channels move towards under the arm or the axilla. These that you see here are just the lymphatics more or less on the surface of the body, comparatively near the surface, and we call them superficial ones. But lymphatics go deep as well. There are deep lymphatics. Important places, well, they're important everywhere. But if this was a female, the lymphatics in the breast region would be very important. Anybody know why, anatomically? It gives a clue to their function. The lymphatics take away foreign material from an area. If, for instance, some soot was injected into the intercellular fluid, not into the blood, but into the intercellular fluid, there's some soot, it would very, very soon be drained away in the lymphatics, or poison, or pus, or bacteria. And so the lymphatics tend to remove the foreign material from the intercellular fluid. Don't forget, the blood is only 15 pints of fluid. And there's a lot of other fluid in the body, remembering that the body is 70% liquid. And if you weigh 150 pounds, then 70% of that is water, and only 10 to 15 pints of it is blood. About, 20 pounds of blood. But there's a lot of other fluid which is outside the blood system. We call it intercellular fluid. So the lymphatics are tiny little processes which drain the limbs. Stationed along the lymphatics are what are called lymph nodes. And these lymph nodes filter out, pick up the foreign material that the lymphatic has brought. And inside these lymph nodes there are white cells which scavenge and consume and attack all the foreign material drained into the lymph nodes in the lymphatic. All those tiny little bead-like structures are lymph nodes. Now, in the region of the groin, just there are large lymph nodes, which are quiescent. When you feel them, they just feel faintly like buttons under your touch. And they are draining, they're receiving the lymphatics from the whole leg. Now, if invasion occurs, if a poison or a whole stream of streptococcus or other bacteria enter the body somewhere through a cut, then immediately the lymphatics channel away this material, or try to channel it away. And the material is passed upwards and upwards, going into the deep structures of the trunk. And on the way there are lymph nodes which catch up this foreign material, soot, bacteria, whatever it is, dye, and so on. And it is a defense line of the body. When the body is attacked, wounded, hurt, the lymphatics tend to move the poison away from the site, and the lymphatics take the poison up to the nearest lymph node. Wherever you have creases in the body, have lymph nodes. Wherever there is, like an elbow, or the groin, or the neck, has after all a lot of creases in it, you will find lymph nodes. Their work is to act as a line of defense to stop invasion. Sometimes they don't succeed, and waves, or rather defense line after defense line, is knocked out. The bacteria get through the lymph nodes. The white cells are unable to cope there. The scavenging is not sufficient. And the next thing is that the poison goes into a higher level of lymph nodes. And then finally, lymph nodes are overwhelmed and the poison gets into the blood. When you get poison in the blood, it's known as septicemia. Septicemia. Emia means blood. Septic, blood poisoning. So the lymphatics are a very important line of defense. Eventually, the lymphatics drain into the venous system. Eventually, the lymphatics drain into the venous system. Here we have the great vein that goes to the arm, subclavian, or from the arm, the subclavian vein runs down into the superior vena cava, and the lymphatics, here's the arm, right arm for instance, the lymphatics drain up to lymph nodes under the arm. There's the lymph nodes under the arm, and then from there they channel and enter a vein and pour into the blood. And so the intracellular fluid is drained upwards and enters the venous system. On the way are these lymph nodes, and they stand as defense posts. They tend to be in the creases of the body, the axilla, the elbow, to get lymph nodes in these regions, even around the wrist, and finally the lymph nodes enter the blood system. In women, they're important in the breast region because pieces of cancerous material from a breast under what we call metastases can break off and pass via the lymph nodes to the axilla. So if a doctor is feeling a lump on a woman's breast, the first place he goes to immediately is to feel in the axilla. Why? To see if there has been spread of this lump to the axilla. If it has spread, it means that it is probably carcinomatous. It is cancer rather than just a benign tumor. So doctors watch out for lymph nodes. A typical way in which it is presented in you is that you have cut your foot in the garden, or you've got a thorn in your foot. And this has persisted, this injury has persisted for some time, and the next thing you know is you've got a swelling in the groin. This is what we mean when we talk about the lymphatic system. It carries away excessive intercellular fluid back into the blood, into the venous system. It traps invading organisms. It also maintains the osmotic pressure of the body fluids, and I'm not going to tell you what that means because it would require half a lecture. And also, the lymphatics are important in the absorption of fat in digestion. We'll talk about that when we do digestion. That, if you have got an intestine like that, you have got fatty materials being digested, the lymphatics will carry the major part of the fat away from the intestinal wall and deposit the fats into the blood. That explains the lymphatic system to you somewhat. There is another important function, and that is that inside the lymphatics, lymphocytes are made. Lymphocytes. You remember last night, these were the white cells which produce antibodies that defend the body against attack. They take a little time to work. The largest lymph node in the body is said to be the spleen. Well, let us put it like that the spleen is an enlarged lymph node, a huge lymph node about the size of your fist that lies under the costal cartilages of the thoracic cage on the left-hand side. If you look at me, that is where the spleen lies, just under the ribs there. And it has, as we shall hear later, a very interesting history to it. In fact, the lymphatic system has an interesting history to it as well. The lymphatic system operated at an early time in man's history. Long before man had developed an adequate blood system, the lymphatic system was working. It is still a delicate structure, easily broken when you examine it under a dissecting knife. It was always a delicate structure because it was functioning when man was just beginning to materialize on the earth. His body, a body about my size, would have weighed about 10 or 15 pounds. Long before the bones were only cartilage then, lightest of cartilage, and therefore could not make the blood, because the red cells are made in the bone so narrow. And only later, when man materialized in the middle of the third root race, materialized powerfully at the time when he was a hermaphrodite, it was then that the bones strongly formed and concretized, and then he was capable of producing a pigmented blood system which took up the capacity of oxygenation. At the same time, we have to remember also that before the blood system of man worked, the spleen, which is part of man's lymphatic system, the spleen was huge. We'll talk about it later. Instead of the spleen being a tiny little fist-shaped organ in the thoracic or under the margin of the ribs in the abdomen up here, the spleen in the earliest days of man was a huge structure like that. And through the spleen, man was attached by an etheric cord to his tribal placenta. And at an etheric level, the men of a tribe or a family or a clan were linked together to the anima mundi that I spoke about a little earlier, were linked together not only by the sinus node to the etheric body of the planet, but to each other by a sort of placental attachment which was anchored in the spleen, which in those days was immense, much more ethereal, and lay in the center of the body. Only in certain disease conditions does the spleen go back to its former greatness. By greatness, I'm referring to size and prominence. If you have certain disorders of the body, like conditions in which the blood cells are being destroyed very, very rapidly, when the blood becomes inefficient, perhaps because of a foreign organism invading the body, I believe in malaria it can happen, then the spleen enlarges and occupies almost the whole of the abdomen, to be that size, from a fist size to a size about 18 inches long, occupying most of the abdomen. Under this false stimulation, in which the blood has become inefficient, the spleen tries to take back its old position of importance, and the blood was no longer the important structure, but the lymphatic system was not yet the important structure, but the lymphatic system was more important. So the spleen tries to revert to its original functioning and shape. All this, of course, will be put in great detail in the new books which lie ahead of me. So we are now aware of the lymphatic system. One thing I didn't mention was that in all the lymphatics there are valves. There are valves like that. It's just the slightest movement of the body brings movement always of the lymphatics. The lymph is the liquid of the lymphatics. Once the liquid's in the lymphatics, it's called lymph. And so the lymph always moves up towards the venous system. This is the reason why you can't stand still for very long. It's much nicer to be able to move your leg, even if it's only slightly, because immediately the lymph is shunted up towards the venous system. It is said in esoteric literature, and I believe it to be true, that the moon and its activities not only lifts the surface of the sea in what we call tides, especially the spring tide at the time of the full moon, but in certain vessels of the body, including the end arteries of the brain, I haven't described yet, the moon has an effect of dilating, of increasing the flow of liquids in certain vessels of the body, including, of course, the lymphatics themselves. And certain individuals, by virtue of their natal charts, are sensitive to lunar influence. Like frequently women suffer from tensions before the time of the full moon. Sometimes the same sort of women suffer from premenstrual tension. And remember that the menstrual cycle is still anchored to the moon cycle of 28 days. It has disorders of its own, but we need to understand it in order to consider the main subject here tonight, which is inflammation. It comes then to the subject of inflammation. And let us say that just for example, we have a cut in the arm. A little boy who has, as boys often do, got a cut in the surface of his skin. There's the skin there. There's a cut in the flesh, into the skin. We're talking about that now. What are the sort of things that inflammation results from? When do we get inflammation? Inflammation results from damage to the tissue. Damage to the tissue. Without damage to the tissue, somewhere or the other, inflammation is usually not possible. Damage to the tissues can be caused by bacteria attacking the tissues, a weakened tissue, like the mucous membrane of the nose. Mucous membrane of the nose can become weakened and bacteria can attack it. Or if some part of the body is suffering from a lack of vitamins, avitaminosis, like the gums, because there's a lack of vitamin C, and the cells of the gums can't replace themselves, they're getting worn out by the food that is rubbing on them, then the gums become raw and infected. Any break in the skin of the body makes you liable to infections, invasion by bacteria. Trauma, you know these words. Trauma, T-R-A-U-M-A, means violence conducted on the body. Trauma, traumatic, trauma. That can cause inflammation. A twisting of the bowel is a traumatic incident. And if the bowel is twisted, you can get inflammation occurring where it is twisted. The inflammation probably resulting from the bacteria invading the weak tissues, twisted and therefore lacking a blood supply. Appendicitis, where you have got a region poorly supplied with blood, very frequently produces an inflammation. Poison causes inflammation. Toxin coming from the bacteria, the excretory product of bacteria, toxin, or toxins coming from the liver, where the liver has broken down protein, taken the good part of the protein out, and left the poor part, the bad part, the poisonous part of the protein behind, which is toxic. So these things can cause inflammation. Now the first thing that happens, we should note, when you get a cut or an injury, is that wherever there are damaged cells, and I'm putting them in here, cells that are broken on the edge of the cut, there's the cut, there are the cells that have been partially damaged, you get a release of a substance known as histamine. Histamine gives that stinging sensation, that soreness to a cut where you have damaged tissue. Not only the nerve experience, but the histamine acting on the nerve. Now, immediately the histamine and other substances are released from these damaged cells into the blood. The blood supply to the area increases tremendously. The moment that this occurs, straight away, instead of the blood supply to the area being very light, immediately the histamine makes the arteries dilate, and the flow of blood to the region is tremendous. It becomes all red, redness of inflammation. The materials released from the damaged area have made the blood vessels wide and increased their flow. Very interesting. In old days, people aggravated by rheumatism, rheumatic pain in a joint, would sometimes take stinging nettles and flog themselves with stinging nettles in that area. The result of the stinging nettles was to cause a release of histamine. The histamine would cause a dilatation of the blood vessels to the area, and immediately more blood, more oxygen to the area would bring a release of the rheumatic pain, an increase of mobility, and so on. The next thing that happens is that the blood vessels in the area not only dilate, but the space between the cells in each blood vessel becomes larger. The space between the cells becomes larger, and liquids flow out. Liquids flow out of the blood vessels into the area because the spaces have become enlarged as a result of this wounding, the release of histamine. And so out of the blood vessels comes a lot of proteinous fluid, serum, plasma, so on. So that's the next thing. And the result is that you have got the clotting material of fibrin comes here and helps clotting if the wound is big. But more than anything, you have got so much fluid here that the whole area begins to swell, begins to swell up. So you've got swelling, and you've got redness, and you've got soreness at the site of the inflammation. The effect of all this swelling is to constrict the area, to wall it off. It walls the area off. Everything is tight. The pressure contracts the blood vessels, gets squeezed off. Nothing can move out of the area because it's hard and firm and swollen. It has the effect of holding the poison that has invaded the body, the bacteria, to that area. That's how the body walls off the site of the infection. This gives the white cells a chance to attack. The white cells come pouring out of the blood vessel gaps. The white cells that we were talking about last night, they cluster in the wound and immediately attack bacteria and attack dead tissue. They consume dead tissue and the bacteria, and the white cell, what's the board? The white cell becomes engorged with dead tissue and germs. Becomes engorged and becomes a pus cell, and it dies, having engorged, trapped the material that has been causing the invasion, having consumed vast amounts of dead tissue. Each of these white cells becomes a pus cell and dies, and they make up the substance of pus. That's what pus is. The yellow matter expressed from a sore, from a cut, is pus, made up of dead white cells and some of the yellow material of the plasma, which is the liquids, the intercellular fluid, and that makes up what we call pus. The next thing that happens, or about the same time, is that from this area, a globulin, which is a protein material, enters the blood, goes around the body, and it alerts the whole body, and it causes the release of white cells from the bone marrow. This globulin leaves the area, goes to the bone marrow. There's a bone, the marrow in. There's the bone, there's the marrow, and the marrow is a storage place for white cells, where they're born, where they're produced, hematopoiesis. Immediately, white cells are released into the blood, and your blood count can go up from 4,000 white cells per cubic millimeter to 20,000, to 30,000. And inflammation going on, because not all inflammation is pancreas. Means inflammation, pancreatitis, inflammation of the pancreas, which you can't see, and it can kill easily. Alcoholics very frequently suffer from pancreatitis, and it can kill them. Inflammation of the pancreas, which is not visible. But you could find that out from the number of white cells that you count in the blood. May have a meningitis, inflammation of the brain that may not show, except perhaps with a stiff neck, child getting a stiff neck. Indication of meningitis, inflammation of the membranes covering the brain. So this is the next stage. Then later, about 12 hours, 24 hours after the infection, lymphocytes arrive at this region. Lymphocytes coming out of the lymphatic arrive in the region, millions of them, and they suddenly change. This is what they looked like last night. You remember they got a large nucleus. They suddenly change and they become macrophages, and they can consume foreign material. So the body has a magnificent mechanism whereby it can deal with inflammation. Inflammation goes on longer, then other lymphocytes make antibodies to the toxin produced. If you have got a virus infection, the virus may produce toxic materials shaped like that, same as I did it last night. This would be called an antigen, one of the things infecting the body. The lymphocytes would make structures which would be able to trap these antigens, hook onto them, and make them clump and useless. That is an antibody reaction to antigens or toxins, and that would be sustained for a long time. In fact, so powerful is the reaction of the antibodies that you may be immune to that sort of attack, that kind of bacteria for years ahead. This gives you some immunity to it. So this then is the subject of inflammation. What about the subject was really intended tonight to be on elimination, the removal of waste materials from the body, and it is one which intrigues, interests, concerns just about everybody. When one treads the path, one becomes, as it were, able to take up and use new energies, extra energies, not available to ordinary man. And the result of this is that our elimination processes tend to change quite considerably. Of course, the body has to eliminate immense amounts of waste. There are certain parts to the foods that we eat that cannot be completely digested. So there are many things that we can't digest and have to be eliminated. Perhaps the most important material waste product is that of nitrogen, the nitrogenous waste material of protein digestion. We have to eat protein. About 18% of our food by weight each day should be protein. Children, more than this. Of that 18%, a good proportion of it should be whole protein. Whole protein like the yolk of an egg, or meat, or fish. We'll talk about nutrition later. About half of all the protein we eat is excreted as nitrogenous, poisonous material, toxic to the body. The material is called urea, U-R-E-A, urea. We excrete most of the toxin of urea by means of the kidneys. Kidneys excrete the urea, and it forms a major part of the organic material of the urine. There's a white powder I described last night, and it is highly toxic. If your kidneys are temporarily out of order, the amount of urea in the blood can increase and increase and increase, leading to the condition of uremia, emia meaning blood, high level of urea in the blood, and this can produce coma and death. We have to excrete through the kidneys water. Water, not only the water that we drink, but water can come through the digestion of fat. In fact, carbon dioxide and water are the natural waste products of the digestion of glucose, carbon dioxide and water. Most of the carbon dioxide is excreted by a different path than the kidneys, but the kidneys excrete water. Kidneys will reabsorb what water the body needs and excrete the rest. Carbon dioxide is excreted from the lungs. We breathe carbon dioxide out of the body through the lungs. It is a waste material. If it gathers in the body, it can cause a change in the blood chemistry. The blood chemistry will cause the body to breathe in a different way in order to eliminate the carbon dioxide. We also excrete a lot of waste material through the skin, metallic substances even, salt, sodium, fluoride, even a little sugar sometimes through the skin. We also excrete waste materials by means of the bowel, especially the pigment of the blood. The red pigment of red cells is recycled, or rather I should say the iron part of the red cells is recycled back into the body, but the red pigment of the cells tends to be excreted from the liver through the bile duct into the alimentary canal and into the feces. And so all these materials have to be got rid of. Their accumulation in the body leads to disorders. Now, it is truthful to say that successful elimination from the body is frequently related to attitudes of mind and emotion. Everybody knows that people who are fearful can break out into a sweat. Everybody knows that people who are nervous can have diarrhea. So, it has been traditionally argued that excretion is very, very much related to the psyche of man. Indeed, this is an occult fact, that how we excrete and where we excrete and the extent to which we can or can't is frequently related to the state of our astral body and our etheric body. We should remember that there are other organs of excretion in etheric substance. The etheric body itself excretes vast amounts of etheric energy which has been channeled through the etheric body and changed somewhat by the vibrations of the individual and excreted. The main region of excretion from the etheric body is through the surface of the skin, and especially through the surface of the feet and the hands. We should remember that breathing, therefore, is not only an act of taking in important materials like oxygen and prana, but it's also a method of excreting. I want to define, it's rather pedantic, but I wanted to define the difference between excretion and elimination. Excretion and elimination. Waste products that are eliminated from the body and have not been inside a cell in the body, these are elimination products. By that I mean, person swallows the skin of a grape or the skin of a piece of sweet corn. The body cannot digest it, has not got cellular organisms which can break down the cellulose of the skin of the grape or the sweet corn. And this material is passed out of the body without having gone into any of its cells. Remember, food placed into the tube that runs through the body is not inside the body, not from an esoteric point of view anyway. It lies inside the alimentary canal, which begins at the mouth and ends at the anus, considering it later. But food placed in here is not in the body until it's absorbed through cells into the body. And we eliminate a lot of this waste material that we can't digest. Now that is pure elimination. But when a material, like water, has been through the body and is excreted in sweat, this is excretion. It's been inside the cells and is excreted from the sweat glands and the skin. So that's the difference between excretion and elimination. For our level of approach, it's merely a pedantic observation. I would give you what I regard to be the secret of long life, the secret of much healing. And it is a truth, that it does give long life. Not necessarily a long life in terms of years, but a long life which is long in terms of what has been done in that life. You can sit down and total up the years of your life. They're in a very different way from what the world accepts them. I could say that I have, for instance, spent, like you, 12 years at school. I have spent 16 years at university. I have spent 4 years as a clerk, 6 years full-time in the war, and 4 years as a farmer, and 10 years as a doctor, and 14 years as an international lecturer, 15 years as an editor, and 4 years as an author, and so on. And before you know where you are, you have a figure that is in excess of the number of years in which you've lived. This is a damn good figure indicating your creative span of life. And that, after all, in the end, is the important thing. There is an energy which tends to eliminate much of the harmful materials of the body, the cholesterol that can cause the coating of the arteries and calcium formation there, the energy that can reduce the threat of bacterial invasion, the energy that can keep the brain fresh and able to concentrate until you're 80, and so on. A long list of what it can do. And I always liken it to an experiment that we used to conduct in our laboratories, kids at school. Probably your own children do it still. We used to take a deflagrating spoon, a long handle with a small spoon on it, and we used to fill it with sugar. Here's the sugar. We set it alight and burn the sugar until it formed carbon, black carbon. All that was left was a spoon with black carbon on it. Sort of thing that happens if you're making toffees or sweets or candy, as you call it here, in the pan, and the pan burns, and all you're left with is some black charcoal. That's the glucose turned into a black carbon, sooty material. And we used to take this material as part of a biology exercise and put it into a gas jar containing oxygen. And we would, first of all, light up, heat this black carbon until it was red hot. The Bunsen burner, plunge it into the oxygen and seal the oxygen off like that. And we would always be amazed to see the oxygen combining with this hot carbon. The carbon would disappear. Carbon would disappear. The spoon would be empty, would be left in there completely empty. Carbon had disappeared into a gas. The oxygen and the carbon had combined to form carbon dioxide. Carbon had gone. The spoon had been decarbonized. That's you coming in what? At an esoteric level, there is an energy that can decarbonize the body, can make elimination easy, and the removal of toxins, and the freedom from inflammation, and so on, possible. What is it? It is the energy of enthusiasm. People who are enthusiastic over their jobs don't get sick in their jobs. People who are enthusiastic about their marriages don't separate. And if you are enthusiastic in what you are doing, it will tend to keep the body constantly eliminating healthily its toxins and poisons. It will cause regeneration of tissues that are damaged far beyond those the generations of others, so on and so on. And it acts mentally, in the mental body, astrally, on the astral body, and etherically and physically. Energy of enthusiasm keeps the channels open. It is the most important message that I can give. And the person who is not enthusiastic is the person who is not expressing himself. And the person who expresses himself worst of all is the person who is not expressing his soul's purpose. Find the soul's purpose. There are many things in the esoteric teachings which help you to find the soul's purpose. Now, you know me well enough that I wouldn't put this piece of information in needlessly. Hell, I've got enough to talk about without talking about needless things. I mean it. And that takes me to the answer of elimination. The secret of elimination is, first of all, to consider how and where you get your energy. People come to me and they say, God Almighty, how can you go on when you've been under attack incessantly for 7 years, the 7 years that you've toured this country? You have been attacked at all levels. You have had financial setbacks. You have had this. You have had that. How can you go on? The answer is simple. In order to get rid of things that are toxic in the body, you must bring energy into it. And how do you bring energy into the body? By that I mean the aura. The way to get energy in is to get rid of it. And I'm trying to describe a dynamic process, which enthusiasm is the generating force. The more you can express energy, the more will come to you. There is no limitation to the supply of energy. We are nothing compared to the energy that is available to us. Heavens, have I not known so many occasions in which the energy, the spiritual energies of the cosmos have flowed into our planet to such an extent that the masters, the hierarchy, have not been able to deal with it on their own and have channeled it through anyone that would take it for days on end. The men are blank. The energy is there, tremendous energy. And the secret of long life, in the terms that I expressed it a little earlier, is to get rid of it. You'll never be short of energy if you can get rid of it. It's when you take energy in, whether it's food or stimulation from above or about you, you can't do anything about it. Bottle it up in you. That leads to dis-ease, the inability to use the energy, to express it in the world. Where do I get my energy from? I get rid of it. That's where I get my energy. All you do, all you are, as I described in my book Meditation, we are nothing more than a sleeve of linen, like a drogue on a mast. And all we are sleeves which pass energy through us. We pass energy through us. To know this is true, you took any tissue of the body, broke it down into its ultimate particles. All you would have is a vortex, a sleeve, a drogue, which allows energy to come in at the North Pole and pass out of the South Pole. And each part of this is but the same thing repeated. There are areas in which energy is in motion. Ecstasy is enthusiasm taken to its utmost, where all the channels, all the vehicles are channeling energy to the utmost. We call it superconscious experience. But vast energies of the cosmos flow through us. We experience ecstasy. Taken down a few pegs in ordinary everyday life outside of superconsciousness, it's enthusiasm. Enthusiasm regenerates the organs, keeps them healthy, feeds them with vitality endlessly. And that's the great message that I have to give you at this stage of the course. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.